Oops. Good morning, everybody. My name is Samantha Mirabal with Mocha's application team, and we're doing our Design Shop Talk today. Answer whatever questions you might have, and if you have questions while we're live, please type them in on the chat. Don't send them privately. I don't see those until long after, if ever. So just type them in on the chat. We're live on both Facebook and YouTube, and we'll see what we can get to. Hi, Sherry. Thanks for joining today. So I'll start off with the questions that were sent in ahead of time. We have a few fun ones. All right, fun for me. So hopefully they're fun for you. So we'll start off with that. Can I do a live tutorial on how to do an applique step-by-step? Yes, I'm going to do that one. It'll take me a minute. So yeah, we're going to start with that one. All right, so I got this little reindeer guy here. I actually did it ahead of time, but I'm going to do it all again. So when you're wanting to set up files for applique, so doing it on the machine is one thing, setting up the files is another. So first you got to set up a file to be able to go sew out an applique. And if you're unfamiliar with the technique, have you ever seen those, the big old jackets that have text across the front, right? And that's usually some fabric that has a satin or zigzag around it to hold it down. That technique is applique, where instead of doing fill stitches, you are putting down fabric in place. So in this case, all of these big pieces I want to have be fabric, okay? And I'm gonna design this to fit into an 11 by 17 hoop, so it's pretty huge. And we'll go from there. So first you got to know your design. This is the design I want. So I'm taking the vector because vectors make it easier. If you have a JPEG, that works too, but instead of doing this change element from one type to another, you're gonna have to trace it. So if this were a JPEG, I would have to come in here and trace my shape. So just, and I'm not going closely because it's a reindeer. Anyway, so if this were a JPEG that you brought in, you would have to go through and trace it. All right, I'm going to stop there. All right, but this is a vector, so I'm going to take this. Now, the steps to applique, you've got to basically, you hoop your fabric, and then you're going to sew where you want to put the fabric. All right, so I'm going to take this guy, click on the change element from one type to another, and now I'm going to click on normal stitch and say add. All right, so now if I turn this all off at the, let's turn, nope, that's not what I want to turn off. I want to turn the vectors off and turn on what I just did. All right, so what that will do is I would sew that first color, and then I go grab my piece of fabric, and away from your machine, you would spray it with a spray adhesive. I've seen people use glue sticks and put glue on there. It washes out, so as long as you use the washable glue sticks. There's a product from Madeira. It's a Applique Magic or something like that. Applique something or other. OESD makes one as well. But basically that you iron onto the back that makes it sticky. So then you can then stick it down to the fabric. All of those, what is that doing? It's just holding the fabric over the stitch you just stitched down. All right. So I got my stitch. Step one, I'm going to copy, paste that, make it a new color. All right. So pretend this is color one. That's color two. I like the stitch that actually sews the fabric down to be a bean stitch. That's a personal preference. Does it have to be bean stitch? No, I just like it because when I grab my scissors and I'm cutting around this shape, so basically how it works is I'll sew this one down. I'm going to go grab a piece of fabric and I'm going to draw it on like a vector. Okay, so let's say I just draw fabric over this, and okay, so I just laid fabric down, covering that up in my hoop. All right, so now I'm going to go sew this guy, and it sews the fabric down. So now I grab my scissors and I come around and cut this thing. So when I cut it out, now I am left with this fabric sewn down in that shape. Okay, so I like the bean stitch because when I'm cutting around, if I nip a thread here and there, it's not going to fall apart. So because there's 3 pieces of thread holding it. So then again, I'm going to change element from one type to another. Now I'm going to go to a single line and again add. All right, so this again needs a separate color because that's going to be my zigzag, and I really like a zigzag closer to 30 points wide. And then you can set it to tackle stitch. Now tackle is level dependent. If you don't have that, that's okay. Use your satin, go into the properties of the satin, and I got to turn off auto density. You know, put that around 17 to 20. And it's not the same thing as a tackle stitch, but it will work. It'll hold your fabric down. Okay? All right. So placement, tack down. That holds it in place. So now if I want to embroider, which remember my design, I don't want to look at the reindeer right now. The words. This is for another example coming up. All right. So now I've got these ears, which I'm just going to sew. I'm not going to use those as applique pieces. I mean, you could, but so in this case, I can come through and just add a stitch direction to them. And you'll see, if I zoom in, now that's sewing. That's cool. So again, I'm going to do the same thing with this guy. Add a stitch direction, select it, add a stitch direction. All right, so placement, tack down, zigzag, do my embroidery, and now I can then take my shape again, and again convert from one type to it. Oh, it's already a single line, so never mind, cancel. So I'm just going to copy that, Control C, Control V, and this time I want my density to be, you know, a top stitch, right? So make it 4 and maybe 40. Cool. All right, so now I've got that part of it done. And you would just work through your file and do the same thing. So for these ears, I selected them both. How do I do that? Click on one, select the other, holding my Control key down, so now they're both selected. I can use this guy, or I can say Shift, hold my Shift key down and click on that. Notice that added a walk stitch all the way around both of those shapes. All right, so that would be my placement stitch for both of those. So then I could put a piece of fabric over each one of those. Again, I'm going to copy that, paste it, give it a new color, change it to a bean stitch. All right, why bean? Because that's my preference. It can be another running stitch if you want. Again, I'm going to copy, paste, make it a separate color change. And the reason you do the color changes is when you set this up on your machine, you want to hit those applique stops so that you have time to be able to go make changes. So I'm going to change this to a single line, and I'm going to replace it this time because I don't want to leave those an additional bean stitch. And remember, this guy is going to be my tackle at a width of, I don't know, 25 to 30, something like that. And again, I'm going to copy that, paste it, change the color, change it to a satin stitch, make that closer to 40 points. All right, mouse, there we go. Okay, so now I've got that. So you just work your way through the design, creating it, so that when it's all said and done, you now have a nice embroidery design. And where these vectors are, that's where fabric is going to go. Okay, so that's how I would recommend doing it. This is just straight embroidery, so I just created embroidery there. So any questions on creating the files? Now, when you go to set it up on your machine, I didn't move this one up. Let me find it. There. So when you go to set it up on your machine, see this little applique button? So when you set the color, so remember I said it does that walk stitch first, that you just hoop your fabric and sew it. And then you want it to stop. So color 1, applique. The pantograph is going to come out from under the machine and it's going to sit there. All right. So now I can grab my scrap of fabric with whatever sticky adhesive you want, stick it down, and hit start, which is the green button on your keypad, right? It'll pull the pantograph back under and it will run the other one. I should have the word applique under here, which I don't. In this, but I would put, again, click applique so it's between there, because after it runs that tack down, I need it to come back out now so I can take the hoop off and cut around my shape. All right. And then you put it back in, run the rest of that until it's time to put the next fabric down. And then you would just keep on, you know, going through your color changes, putting the applique stops where you need the machine to stop and bring itself out. Are both platforms up? There's that one. Yep. And there's that one. Okay, cool. All right. So, yeah, so that's how you would set it up on your machine. Applique you know, it's a really neat technique. It cuts down your stitch count significantly. So when you're doing really large things, you could take something that would take 3 hours to sew and turn it into a 20-minute sew out, because you're not spending 3 hours just running back and forth covering a space with thread. Okay, so there are some big benefits to going to an applique technique. What type of fabrics you can use, pretty much anything you can imagine. When you're using, you know, I like using twills or specific, you know, basically nice twills that you can get from Stalls or Twill USA, or you can even find them at Joann's. I like the poly-backed ones personally because they're nice and stable. They don't fret, those sorts of things. But, you know, if you use quilter's cotton, you can also use some fusible stabilizer on the back of it before you use it, because it stops it from wanting to shrink up and move around. So, you know, basically just make it a little stiffer so that you don't have issues with shifting as you're working with it. Anyway, so that's applique. Let me know if that helps. In version 11, is there a quick way to lower the density of a purchased design without expanding it? Yeah, that's the scale technique. We do have some videos out there on that, but here, let's see. Open C drive. Where's C drive? There it is. Designs, legacy, and that's an expanded file, EXP. So when you get files that are purchased, they're in DSTs or EXPs, they're expanded formats, right? So I can select, let's say, those pairs, right click, go to scale, and then you can play with all this stuff. And it, you know, if you want to add pole compensation, keep in mind some of it's for columns, some of it's for fills. Down here, you can play with the densities. You know, these are all fill stitches, so I can play with the density here, the underlay, those sorts of things. So this is the screen that you would do without having to convert. Okay. What other questions? How do we do the primer stitch? I can't figure out. Okay, cool. So the primer stitch is pretty straightforward, right? So you select whatever it is you want to put the shape around, right? So if you want the whole design, I would go Object, Generate Primer, change this thing over to Primer. All right, so once you're here, now you've got an offset. That's how far away do you want that underlay to extend. All right, so if I just take the default, there we go. All right, that's a circle. Let's go back to my reindeer applique. So let's say I was just going to do the head of that guy. Again, Object, Generate Basting, change it to Primer, whatever you want. And, oh, I selected the whole thing. Whoops. There you go. So if it does things like this, then, you know, it's going to approximate the shapes and not necessarily come around here. So you can play with settings on it. But if I want it to be closer to the shape, well, rather than the vector, because it did all the vectors, which is why it did that. Again, I can either go up there, or I can right click, Operations, Generate Basting, Primer Stitch, okay. And it will sculpt around that. So I could go for each of these guys and right click, Operations, Generate Basting, change it to Primer, say okay, and it will work its way around, right? Generate Basting, Primer, poof. All right, well then I can take these guys and merge them together and do, you know, fun stuff like that. So let's say I delete all these. I've committed to this now, so I'm going to show it to you. All right, so if I take all those right here as a merge, so I can merge them into one shape, and then I can copy and paste. If I want that crosshatch pattern, go into the properties and change the stitch 45. So -45. Go. Yeah, there we go. So there, now I got a primer stitch. Okay, closer sculpted to the shape. It's a really neat little, it's pretty easy to do. Sometimes when it's, it won't go super close, which you could just, so if I did that other one where I did the whole vector again and told it to do, let's do that way, object, generate primer. It's going to select all of them. So it's going to do a big box. So if it gave me something like this, that's okay, you know. If I didn't want it, I can come in here and do wireframe editing. So I can, you know, add points around and just make the shape what I want it. And I'm making a pretty ugly shape here, but you guys get the idea. So you can do wireframe editing to change it to whatever you want. Okay. All right, what other questions? I want to delete that because I don't like it. Delete. All right, let's see, what else do we have? I purchased a script font that is letter by letter and you want to weld them together. No, so there's no easy way to do that, particularly with purchased fonts that are letter by letter. It's going to, that digitizer digitized it as one thing. In order to do like cohesive where it keeps going, it's got to be digitized that way to run into the next letter directly, right? So when they do the letter by letter thing, they specifically digitize it so the font will work overlapped, but they don't necessarily flow directly to continue stitching, because imagine two letters next to each other will go together one way, but then another one will go a different way. So they have to plan that to make sure the extender goes in the same way so all the different letters will work together, because they don't know what words you're going to do. All right. So if you wanted to do a connected font, for instance, let's say here I got reindeer. So if I had art, so I could do this myself. So each of these letters is individual, right? Which we don't want. That's what you're trying to avoid. You don't want to sew this letter and then that letter and have them disconnected. So if I have the art, these are vectors, I can select it all. And then right up here again, I can say combine elements, and now they're merged. So if I want to do a straight fill, I can just select that and add a stitch direction, and it will now be a flat fill, all connected. If you want to have it look a little more realistic, where, you know, the eye comes down so there's splits and other things like that, that's again modifying it to insert splices. Or you can even choose to digitize it all manually, which is what I always suggest, because then you can really plan out how you want all the stitches to go, right? So for instance, I could come over here and say, all right, let's do the R with these column stitches, swinging it around, close enough. Ideally, you would zoom in more than I'm zoomed in here, so it's a little cleaner, but, you know. Okay, there we go. There. All right, so I got my first part, and then I would continue on doing the rest. So my next part of the letter would then come up this way. I don't like how I'm clicking. Oh well. It'll still look all right. There. Okay. And then I can do this guy. And let's say I wanted to have a splice here so I could change the directions. And we just lost power here. Hopefully the feed didn't go down. Okay. Anyway, there you go. So you would digitize it manually and paying attention to your starts and stops to make sure it continues running all connected. So did the feeds go down, or are they still live? I think they're still live. Huh. So I have battery backups on my router. Awesome. Because I've got battery backups on all the stuff in here. Ha, excellent. We have a massive storm coming in, so looks like it knocked out my power. All right, we did that. Ooh, do you have any tips on doing chunky yarn applique? Okay, chunky yarn applique. So if you're unfamiliar with it, it uses this. Yeah, Sherry, it should come back. I lost power here, so I think my systems are playing catch up. But it looks, yeah, my Facebook one is clear now, so hopefully the same thing happens with YouTube. Anyway, okay. All right, so chunky yarn applique is where you're taking these yarns, if you will, and sewing them down to fabric. All right, so the yarn is in place of what you would do as satin stitches. This stuff is really thick. I mean, it's like 1/2 inch wide yarn. First off, when working with it, I've seen a lot of videos online that have made me want to cry and yell and say, stop it, please. Don't put your fingers under machines. Bad things happen. Yeah, I have scars to prove it. Don't do it. The machine will win. It will sew straight through your finger. So let's not. So when you're working around appliques, when you're working around chunky yarn, you want to use aids to hold that stuff in place. So for instance, these guys here, chopsticks. These things are really cool. Nate told me about them and awesome. They're meant for electronics, but they're little plastic things. If you sew through them, it's not going to hurt your machine. You might break a needle, but so what? You're not in the hospital getting stitches. So it's not going to hurt anything. So you can use these things. They're called spudgers. I found these on Amazon. You can use tape that washes away. OESD makes this wash away tape, what's nice about that, you can just tape stuff down, pull it off, and anything that stays, you just put a little water on it and it goes away. I've seen people use glue sticks. So glue sticks, again, wash out. So you can use glue sticks. You can use a spray adhesive. All of those things. Now, if you're going to use a spray adhesive, please don't spray it around like at your machine. Take the hoop off. Go find a box and spray it over far away from your machines, and then go back and put the hoop back on. That spray adhesive is gross. It gets everywhere. So just be careful is what. So, yeah. So the tips on there. First off, that is number 1. Keep your hands out of the machine. Use those aids so that you can stick the yarn down in place. So digitizing wise, I've got so that stuff's really wide, right? So I took it's about 1/2 inch, which is close to 135 points. So I just drew a line and made it wide just to give me some art to trace. And yes, it's not the most graceful X or O, but So when you're working on it, you also think about, you're going to be laying a piece of yarn down, right? And then sewing over it. So think about the direction it's sewing. If something moves around and you need to poke at it with your chopsticks or your spudger or anything like that, you don't want it moving into the machine. You want it the hoop coming towards you, right? So, or it's starting to sew. Let me back that out. You want to sew it where as it's sewing the line, you have time to move things around, right? So I want to sew from here to this way, because out here is where I'm standing down. So if I sew here and I'm sewing back, if I have to move the thread that's back here, I have to reach under the machine, and no, let's not. So you want to start here and sew down that way. All right, so if I take this and I do shift click, I want to start there and end there. All right, so that would be my first stitch as a placement stitch. So really what I would do for the very first thing, let me delete all that. I would take them all, shift click, and of course I have to do them one at a time just for fun. Let's do one of the hearts, not that heart, this heart. Okay, I'm just gonna do that. All right, so that's gonna be color 1. That's just gonna show you where it's gonna sew down. So you'd run that step first, and I'm gonna copy and paste and move it over. I know I have art that I should be following, but there you go. All right, so it's gonna run that stitch, just run it. All right, now take your hoop off, go set it on a table, use your spray adhesive, use that fancy tape, use a glue stick, whatever you need to do, and you're going to stick the yarn down over there. And I would leave it a little bit long on each end so you can trim it to fit. And then once it's stuck down on the very first one, I'm going to copy, I want this one first. So copy, paste, give it a new color. That comes down here. I didn't mean to do that. All right, so then I'm going to sew this color. All right, so I'm going to stick it down, put the hoop back on, run this stitch. It's going to do a running stitch down the center of that yarn. And now it's held down. I hit an applique stop, copy, paste. That should have been down here. And now I've got another color. Oops, not that one. This one. Copy, paste. Now I have an applique stop after step 1 and after every step after that, right? So I'm going to lay my yarn down here, and then I sew the stitch. Now, when doing bigger shapes that you're most likely going to have to get your hands in, like if you're doing a swooping E, something like that, what you'll want to do is think again about how it's going to run and do it in pieces, right? So what I would do for this heart is I would actually have it sew, you know, this part right here, and then this part, and then coming down, and then things like that. So I'd probably go like this first across the top, and then stop so I could check stuff. So how do you do that? So copy, paste, and I can split this element at selected points there and there. So breaking it up into segments where I can give it different color changes so that it can stop. That way I can sew part of it down. If I need to make an adjustment, I can move the yarn around and hit go again, and then it can sew the next pieces. So for instance, I would probably want this one starting here, ending there. And I would sew that first. And then I would sew this guy again, starting here, ending down here. So I could sew this part, have an applique stop, sew that part, go make sure this one's right, and it would sew that. Okay, well, I did all the X and O. I don't have to do it again. I can just copy and paste this whole thing and move it over. Poof. And now my design's done, right? So now it's all set up where I'd sew this one, and then I'd have an applique stop after every color change. Fun fact, let's say I want everything, let's say I'm doing these all in red, right? So I'm doing my XOs all red. Well, I can just program the machine. When I mean program the machine, I mean set these color changes right here. I don't have to program all whatever dozen steps that were there. I can just do color 1, applique, and then hit apply OK. So red, applique, and then the rest of it, because what's going to happen is it will just keep repeating that until the end of the design. So that's just a fun little trick. That only works if it's a single color design and you want it to stop after every step color. So yeah, the biggest tips I can give you for chunky applique is keep your hands out. Use tape, use glue, use spray adhesive. If you're using spray adhesive, don't spray it at your machine. As a tech, that just makes me want to cringe and cry, because cleaning up a machine that's gunked up is just not fun. So don't do that. Let's see. What other questions do we have? So do I publish the live schedule somewhere? I don't know. I don't. I do them every week on a Thursday or Friday. It does alternate, mainly because my schedule. On every other Friday, my spouse has off, so we try to use that when I have small children. So we use while they're at school to have some, go out and do something. So if I'm sitting here, I can't do that. So that's why every other Friday. So it's every other Friday. On the weeks I don't do Friday, I do Thursday. So for instance, this week is Friday, so next week is Thursday. Yeah. How can I utilize... Oh, we do have an archive for all the other Design Shop Talks that you can find, which is kind of fun. We did put the link in the comments for you, and that will show you, it gives you links to the videos, discussions of what was covered, those sorts of things. And if links were referenced, there's links to the different articles and things like that. So it's a good resource. You can always do Control F and look for whatever it is you're looking for help on, and that will help. So the link to this area is in the comments for you to look at. All right. how can I utilize the remaining space in an 8 by 13 hoop if I complete a design and there's still empty space and you want to embroider more? I assume you're doing tests of sorts. Okay, so I'm going to do a new, let's change this. Do I have the 8 by 13? Of course not. Customize hoop list. And hi, Rob. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. I actually found it in a quick time. The Mighty Hoops. I'm usually sitting there staring at the list, wondering. Okay. So let's say we sewed this design. And that's where we sewed it. So we sewed it and, hey, I want to go test something over here. Okay. I just brought this up on the screen to show you. What you would physically do is you would take your new design and load it to the machine. So file, load design, load whatever the new design is you want. You don't want to sew it on top of this one. That's fine. What you do is you go to your keypad and you use the hoop button and these arrows, which is jog. So that moves the pantograph around. And you physically just move the pantograph until the center is pointed in an area you think your new design will fit. And then what do? You do hoop trace. So the hoop button and the trace button. And you trace and see if whatever you're going to sew sews over what you've already done, or if it fits. If it fits, you can hit start. If not, hoop and jog the things around until you've got it positioned where you want. Once you can trace it and it's not sewing over anything else, you hit your start button and move along. And it's that simple. You just move the pantograph around, trace your design to make sure it fits where you expect it to fit, and hoop trace and hit start. Okay. So that's what I would do, is just move my pantograph around. So we did get you a link to all the keypad functions in case you're unaware. But yeah, so I could sew a design here, one here, I could put a text here, all of that fun stuff. So it's just a matter of hoop, move, load the design, keep tracing until it fits where you want it to go, and then hit start. Okay. Yeah. That are all the questions I had. So let me quick run through and see if I missed any others. Nope. Okay. All right, y'all. I'm gonna put her around here for just a minute or two in case someone's typing in questions and I don't actually cut them off. So, chunky yarn applique. It's kind of fun, but what are some other things you can use? Oh, tweezers. I recommend using plastic or wood, so that when you hit something, you're less likely. Plastic is great, just real thin stuff like those spudgers, because if you sew through it, you might break your needle, but you're not really going to affect much else. You're not very likely to have a needle depth change or anything like that. So anyway, I will be back. I'll do one next Thursday. So we'll do Thursday, and then we'll probably take off for the year. So vacation time, so that'll be fun, and then we'll be back next year. But yeah, so I'll do another one next week. If you have questions, whenever on social media I post in a few groups this little image here. So if you see that, you can type in your questions ahead of time, and if I need to make examples like I did today with my little reindeer, or with this guy, I can do that ahead of time for y'all. Is that Milko sending me a text? Let me just check if something's wrong. Oh, no. All right, y'all. So have a great weekend. I will talk to you next Thursday. So have a fantastic week and hope your holiday season's going great. Bye, everyone.